Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop RPG and surrounding space, just to have a chit chat and chat to cool people. And speaking of cool people, I'm joined by Alicia Furness. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. How are we doing this afternoon? Again, time zones.
Yes, it is afternoon here. It's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's hot, yeah, and it's summer, and I'm alive.
I always feel like 1 o'clock is like it's a case of like it's afternoon by technicality. It never really feels like it. It's kind of that weird middle ground. But no, again, thank you so much for taking the time, and I guess kind of jumping kind of straight into the questions then. What sort of things have you been making in the tabletop RPG and surrounding space?
What sort of things have I been making? I've had a roller coaster of a career for the short time that I have been making things.
Talk us through it. Let's go on a trip through time.
I started designing things for 5th edition. I got my start contributing to Uncaged. You can find my little siren-themed adventure in Volume 1. So that's sort of how I got my foot in the door, and then it like spiraled, and I was doing more 5e stuff. And then I became known for being what I refer to in a nice way as being co-head bitch in charge of the Eat the Rich anthology / zine series, which made a little bit of a splash, shall we say. Some people may be aware we were a #1 bestseller on the DM's Guild, which was exciting. And then they were like, oops, we made a mistake. This is too political.
Yeah, it is.
You can't say some of those words. So we had a little bit of a disagreement. Mm-hmm. And I made the decision at that point in time to focus my energies elsewhere, because I didn't super love that, admittedly. So now I'm most known for designing in the Brindlewood Bay space. And if you haven't played Brindlewood Bay, you should. It's like Murder, She Wrote meets Eldritch Horrors. You play like elderly women who go around investigating murders, and then there's this cult thing happening in the background, and it's a lot of fun.
I think what I loved about reading over kind of the premise of Brindlewood Bay was the fact that I was like, this just reads like a comedy show, with like the kind of the things where it's like it's a comedy show, but every once in a while there's just some really obscure dark shit that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so fun to play actually because of that kind of like tonal duality happening, right? You're like running around, you're old lady, you're investigating murder, how many people can die in Brindlewood Bay and those classic like British murder mystery style things. Apparently it's a lot of people. And then also horrible death cults sometimes. It's like, what is happening? But I love it. I love the like switch as a player, and as a GM running it is a lot of fun.
Because if also correct me if I'm wrong, you've also kind of been diversifying a little bit in kind of establishing some of your own games. Like I believe, what was it, Honk? I can't not mention Honk, which is was it the Untitled Goose Game inspired, perhaps?
Yes, it is. It is Untitled Goose Game inspired. Honk is so I started pre-Eat the Rich shenanigans. I was like dipping my toe into like more small indie designs on itch, and Honk is like a 1-page GM-less game inspired by Untitled Goose Game. Mm-hmm. But instead of being a horrible goose, the idea is that you're like actually a good goose is just trying to help, and everyone misunderstands things as they of course go wrong because you are a goose and you cannot help.
Yeah, I like it that there's something inherent to the goose that fundamentally they just can't help. They are built for destruction and destruction alone, but there's some outliers. No, awesome. So then I guess one of the questions I always kind of like to ask is like, what was kind of the drive to kind of like first start writing? So was it that you kind of saw the call to action with Uncaged, or was it a little bit before that?
Exactly. I saw the call to action in Uncaged. I had been, I'd been playing D&D for a while, and I was dipping my toe into streaming and having fun, and like my whole identity is about like being a big queer feminist. Mm-hmm. And then of course Ashley was like, hey, come write feminist monsters. And I was like, yes, I will do that. And it was in a classic way that I do projects hobbies, whatever. I was like, I know nothing about this, and dove right in.
I was going to say, in terms of like powerful like retelling, being able to kind of the siren as a creature, I imagine is it's again, it's got to be up there as like one of the best interesting ways you can kind of play with that kind of all the I get the best way to problematic history or like interpretations of it in the past.
Yeah. And my approach, actually, so mine is called Cry of the Sea. It has a strong environmental theme, which pops up in my work. If it's not anti-capitalist, it's definitely like pro-green stuff.
Yeah.
If not the both together. And so what I actually had fun with was in a lot of ways actually leaning into the tropes of the siren in Uncaged. And like, yeah, they're going after men, but like, why are they going after men? And like, it was kind of going through that, but like fully just leaning into the tropes and being like, yeah they're totally murdering men. And then so some of that is trying to figure out why they're murdering men. I don't want to spoil it for anyone.
No, of course. No, geez, the Uncaged anthology is just it's just back to back really interesting ways.
So good. And you know what, I really want to like shout it out for it gave me my start, it gave so many other people their start, and built a community. So like because of this, it obviously drew a lot of marginalized people, right? It pulled in women and non-binary folks and queer folks and people of color to come in, have a space to get their foot in the door, and then all talk to each other and all have all these huge spin-off projects. I can name so many projects that are a direct result of those of us who worked on Uncaged together, just being like, yeah, let's do this and this and this. So it was a really great experience as a community building exercise.
And then I imagine once you kind of had your kind of foot in the door, you kind of just like sprinted in, as you kind of mentioned, exactly. Kind of in head first. Well, then I guess that kind of leans into my question then of like why my first official question then is like, where do your ideas kind of stem from? Is it the case of like, because some of these have kind of taken inspiration from the system that you kind of like, again, with Brindlewood Bay, other times it's kind of been with prompt based, but yeah. Yeah,
I think if I had to say like one thing that I take most often, it's like pop culture things. So I'll be like, I like that, let's turn it into a game. I have a game called Identity, which is a Wretched and Alone system by Chris Bissett. That is literally, it's just Orphan Black, the game. You're a clone on the run. My Powered by the Apocalypse game, Camp Flying Moose for Girls of All Kinds, is like a summer camp themed supernatural investigation game. It's just Lumberjanes. Like I just take properties that I love and then make them into games, but obviously without violating.
Oh yeah, you know, it's
intellectual property.
You're not. It's not like it's a homage. You know, it's the allowed kind.
Yeah, exactly. And then beyond that, sometimes it's just like weird things that pop into my head. I was just talking today. I'm working on a new game called Monster Tea Party.
Nice.
Which was just this idea that I was like, wouldn't it be funny if monsters had to put on a tea party? And then from there, kind of like spiraled into this kind of forged in the dark game where you have to not be caught, that you're a monster, and like things are going to go wrong.
Okay, so it's a monster. Monsters hosting a tea party for humans rather than just other monsters. Yeah. Okay, I was thinking about like monsters hosting tea parties for other monsters. I'm like, well, that just sounds delightful. I don't know, but yeah. So one thing as well, I guess, was there almost like a moment where it kind of clicked for you that you can just freely like shift systems and play around with different games to get different intent? Because I mean, say you come up with an idea, do you immediately kind of know like what game fits it, or do you sometimes find a game you're like, oh, I wouldn't want to make something with this game, what works? I mean,
so sometimes yes and sometimes no. So it depends on the situation. So like Monster Tea Party was like, I just had this idea, wouldn't it be funny if monsters had to put on a tea party?
Yeah.
And that was just it. That was it. And my partner can attest to me just like shouting ideas at him. And then he's like, is that good? I don't know. And then I just go and make a game. And then everyone else can decide if it's good. So I just like, weird idea. And then the more I thought about how it would work, it just kind of clicked for me that it would be, I wanted this flashback idea of like pre-planning. And I was like, oh, well, that's forged in the dark, obviously. And then sometimes, so in the case of Brindlewood Bay, which I have designed a lot of Brindlewood Bay content. It's been said jokingly, but also perhaps it's accurate that besides Jason Cordova, the designer, I may have written the most Brindlewood Bay content of anyone.
It's only a matter of time before you overtake them.
So in that case, I really like the mystery system of Brindlewood Bay. This idea that there's no prep, there's no preset answer to the mystery, which is both liberating and kind of frustrating when you're trying to write for it, because like inherently you want to tell the story in your brain, but the system doesn't want you to tell the story. Like, and I was like, wouldn't this be cool if I could turn this into a GM-less system? And that's how I got Paranormal Inc., my Kickstarter that funded during Zine Quest, which was just, I like this system. What can I do with it? And I was like, I don't know, I like ghosts and science fiction. So then I kind of mashed the two together and came up with.
So I think what, again, to chat a little bit more about like the design of like Brindlewood Bay is the fact that, because the way it works out is you have essentially a series of locations that have the opportunity to deliver like different types of clues or interesting NPCs. And I must admit, I really do like the idea of like procedurally generated adventures or just like that style of content. But I am with you that it is hard to kind of have that almost like bespoke storytelling experience.
Yeah.
It's a careful balance, because sometimes everything kind of falls in place, and it's like, for example, like, I don't know, if you're playing like a game where you have like a puzzle, and sometimes even as the person running the game, you don't necessarily have a solution in mind, and you just let the players fumble around until they do something that you're like, you know what, you've jumped through enough arbitrary hoops that it clicks and the door opens. So what was kind of I guess the desire to be like, okay, well let's try and, I don't know, remove this kind of GM.
I think it was just the desire to like tinker with the system. Like, I think it's so brilliant. And the Between, which Jason also designed, just came out, in which he further tinkers with the system. And also, having written some official Brindlewood Bay content, I was sort of being encouraged by Jason Cordova to like go run with it. So I was like, yeah, okay, I have an interest in stretching the bounds of a system. I don't think that all systems can do all things, although I do also want to talk about that as a design goal. But I am always interested in like how mechanically we can push and pull these systems to like reveal new truths sort of about what's happening thematically in the game. And so it was really just that. I was like, I love this idea, this low, no prep mystery idea. And wouldn't that be great for groups that don't want to have a GM? Also, perpetual GM all the time. Sometimes just want to break, right? Sometimes they just want to play.
I like how the solution sometimes to like, okay, well, I just want to play. It's the fact that there is just no GM. That's it's not someone takes over. There can't be one.
Exactly. And I had also, of course, been designing in Wretched and Alone space a little bit, which uses cards as prompts. And I was like, hey, I could make a procedurally generated mystery using cards that like you would draw randomly to present these prompts. And so I just kind of took the two and mashed them together as an experiment, and then it turned out okay.
So I guess one of the questions is, as you're kind of going through and designing all these prompts, are you still kind of having like threads of like, okay, well, if they get these 3 prompts together, it tells like a nice story? Or are you trying your best to kind of keep it fully detached of like anything goes?
So this is like deep dive into how I design. I was just talking to people about it in the sort of Brindlewood Bay design space, is that I make a very concerted effort not to come in with any story. So when I'm writing either for Brindlewood Bay or now for Paranormal Inc., which has a kind of like plug and play module system to it, I start by writing like the setup. You have to have a mystery setup, right? Obviously. So I bare bones write the setup. I'm writing a Paranormal Inc. one right now called Midnight Feast. The setup is there's a bunch of like weird noises in an alley. And my concept is that it's like the ghosts of urban animals. I live in the city, I see a lot of like roadkill and things like that. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if they were just still hanging around like ghosts, making a racket in an alleyway? So I like write the setup for that. And then as I go through, so in Paranormal Inc., you have prompts for NPCs, you have prompts for locations, you have prompts for clues, and then of course you have prompts for paranormal events because you are ghost hunting, so you have to have weird things happening. And so I always start by writing the locations and the NPCs, and just figuring out like what's going to be in the space, what's going to be in the alley in this case, which was surprisingly difficult. There's not that much stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say there's the alley itself, and then I guess more. It just keeps going.
Exactly. And then, so that was like a fun challenge, of course. Sometimes you get these ideas and then you get into the design and you're like, oh, what did I do to myself?
Yeah,
here?
Especially like sometimes when you have like an X amount of cards or like X amount, like a table of like 10 that you have to fill out.
Exactly.
It gets like, you've got 6 down, like this is great. And then you're like, oh,
yes.
more is.
And that is exactly what happens, obviously, in Paranormal Inc. There's a set number of cards, right? You're using a deck of cards. So, and then, because I am I don't know, sadist, I guess, or a masochist. Which one hurts themselves? I'm that one.
I think sadist. No, I think.
No, I think you're.
No, I think it's
masochist.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. Because I'm a masochist, I was like, let's put 3 prompts on every card. So now I have to come up with 30 prompts. It's a lot. But so I start with the locations and the NPCs, and all I do is think about like thematically. So when I'm writing NPCs, I don't think about like the story. I think about archetypes. I think about like what kind of archetypes do I want to see in this, what makes sense thematically for my weird Midnight Feast alley thing. And then for clues, I go through and try to write clues that could link to, so it matters more in Brindlewood Bay where they're suspects and not NPCs. I try to write clues, at least one for every suspect that clearly links back to that suspect, and then the rest are just kind of thematic to the mystery. And then in Paranormal, like same with paranormal events, I'm like, what weird stuff would happen based on the potential, clues, locations, and NPCs, and also just thematically what fits. And so all you're doing is putting pieces for the players to play with. And so the key is always like coming back to that theme, coming back to that tone, and being like, what makes sense for this, because players want to fill in details. So like, even if you're like, this clue might come up and make no sense in the context of the scene on its face, they will find a way to make it work.
So I guess a good part of, like, I imagine GM-less content is the game itself proposing enough questions. It's because I suppose that's kind of what invites the kind of discussion of like, okay, well, how does this puzzle piece we've just been given fit in with the story? And that's kind of how you have that almost like collaborative element of like, well, it could be this, and then one thing I did want to touch on about with Paranormal Inc. is obviously you went through and were successfully kind of Kickstarter funded. Is it Kickstarter funded or kickstarted? I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm gonna go with
kickstarted, but I don't know if that's correct.
I'm gonna go with kickstarted because that sounds cool. Successfully kickstarted. How did you find kind of navigate? Because so going from the DMs Guild onto like Itch, going through kind of Kickstarter, 3 very different markets.
Yes, they're radically different. And my experience, I think, defies all conventional knowledge.
Yes, that's what I like to hear for a podcast.
So when I started, of course, all my stuff is still available in the DMs Guild. So even though I'm not like actively designing, and even though maybe the guild and I are not best friends, my stuff is still there. You can still buy it. I will still occasionally promote it because I still like the work I did there and I would like to get paid for it.
You guys are divorced, but it's amicable,
Exactly. But so everyone told me that I was going to make the most money on the DMs Guild. And so like, we don't have to necessarily talk numbers because that's triggering to people, but I like contributed to some like high profile projects. And like, I'm nowhere near one of the top earners by any stretch of the imagination, but I was making a decent amount of money on the DMs Guild. And I was told that like, that was going to make the bulk of my money, and there was no money in Itch. And for a solid year, I have made more money every month on Itch than I have on the DMs Guild.
Wow.
for a variety of reasons, potentially. I think I might promote that more.
Yeah.
Number one, tipping is a culture on itch that makes a big deal. Like running sales, you can do that. You know, also they don't take 50%.
I imagine that helps just a smidgen.
So I feel like I was set up really well in a way because everyone told me it was all doom and gloom and I was gonna like see this backslide in my career, and that didn't happen. Also because I blew up my DM's Guild career in a spectacular fashion. Like I just burned those bridges to the ground. And so I really needed itch to work, and it did, and that was great. And so I was like, all Kickstarters fail. That's what you hear. Kickstarters fail. And that's not like I was cocky. I was like, I'm definitely going to succeed. I was like convinced I was going to fail, but I was also like, everyone told me itch wasn't going to work out either. So I just sort of have the confidence of being like, let's try this new thing. Let's keep trying this new thing. Kickstarter is like a mind fuck. Sorry. I don't know it is.
That sounds like that. I could cite that. It's a bit of a mind fuck.
It is. I'm happy. Without it, I would not have been able to fund Paranormal Inc. Well, certainly not as quickly. Like it would take a lot longer. But I don't really love it as a sort of basis for this is the only way we can get our work made.
The all or nothing is kind of, it's quite daunting. And exactly. I think the kind of the fatigue of having like just a month long or however long campaign of just constant marketing is.
So I released Paranormal during Zine Quest, and so that's only 2 weeks, and I can't imagine doing it for a full 30 days, which is like the standard, because I think I was unbearable to live with. Like I was just constantly watching the Kickstarter all the time. Refresh. Even after we funded, and like I had a relatively successful Kickstarter, we funded within 24 hours. I raised almost double my goal. So like, oh, good. Like it was a successful Kickstarter, but there was still this like anxiety constantly all the way throughout it. And I will probably run other Kickstarters because I am a marginalized person who is chronically underemployed, and I don't have a safety net with which to take risks on my projects. But I would ideally like to move away from having to depend on Kickstarter, and honestly, I think that should be the goal of most people who are using their Kickstarters.
So I guess it's always hard to kind of say why a Kickstarter succeeded, because it's always a case of like, well, it did. It's kind of like, was almost like survivor bias. But do you think it was a combination of just kind of having a fan base beforehand, as well as establishing, again, within the kind of Brindlewood Bay community, to be like, this is kind of like a reimagining, a retake, or an expansion. I'm curious, actually, how do you view Paranormal Inc? Is it like an expansion of Brindlewood, or like a retelling?
Okay, I would call it a hack. Yeah, I would call it a hack. That is in the spirit of, in a very ghostly way, of Brindlewood Bay. I do think I think I'm still a relatively like small fish in a small pond, but it's still a small fish in a small pond. So I didn't have like I don't have a huge following. But I do have the work on Brindlewood Bay, and I do have some larger people who have championed my work, which is key, I think. And then beyond that, I mean, I had good art, I think, and I hustled. I hustled in the weeks leading up to it, and in like the first week of the campaign, a little less in the second week, but I just like, all I did was talk about Paranormal Inc., which is sort of what you have to do, I think, to try to be successful.
You have to keep shouting, and even it's always a case of like, oh well, I've done a tweet today, and it's case, well, you need to do 7 more today, because there's people waking up at like all different types. You need to hit the the US crowd, the Europe. It's never ends.
So I think the success is in part, largely maybe because of people championing me, and then me like working my butt off. I hope that it's because also at least part of it is that it seems like a fun, good game.
So then I guess to talk about like to actually like pivot from like talking about Kickstarter more about like, you know, your creative process of, you know, what you think makes fun or good. When you're going through the process of designing something, what would you say is your favorite and least favorite part of creation?
So my favorite part is that idea phase. So I have ADHD, and so like I get really excited when I have this idea, and I'm like all in for the first like 30% of the project, and I'm super excited about it, and then it's a slog. And so it's kind of a cop-out, but when the end in a way is like finishing it is the worst part, because it's like so hard for me to focus and to like, by that time I've had 40 other very exciting ideas that I would much rather be working on. My computer is a graveyard of half-finished projects that might see the light of day one day eventually. But yeah, so definitely it's that initial spark of idea that I find the most exciting. And then secondary to that is how it changes.
Interesting.
Like, so, you know, I have this idea and I'm like, it's really great. In my Monster Tea Party game, my original idea actually just was, I don't know, what if it was just monsters having a tea party? Like, literally, I was just really focused on this idea of a singular one-shot game about having a tea party. And then I sort of thought, tangential, again, design goals. One of mine is to make things that are as widely adaptable as possible. But that's not really achieving one of my larger design goals. How many times can you play a game about monsters having a tea party? I mean, I feel like I could play it a lot, but there's going to be a point where you're like, okay, been there, done that. And so then it became like, what is actually interesting about this concept? It's not monsters having a tea party, right? It's this idea of like monsters doing this kind of, you know, mundane thing or this very like highly specialized thing. And so it expanded. And even though it's called Monster Tea Party, it's actually just about monsters trying to exist in the world and not be identified as monsters by the human beings that they work in. And so as it changes, I get excited as I change ideas, because to me that says that it's like that you're growing as a designer, you know?
So I kind of want to touch on, because you just kind of mentioned something interesting there, which I think is kind of like a fundamental difference about certain systems, and particularly the ones that kind of encourage almost like one shots or like single session play, is the fact that replayability is probably more desired or more kind of built in than any of sort of like, I guess, like the one shots that are like you do it and then you never really visit it as like you have like 5e. What are some of the ways that you try and encourage that kind of replayability? Because obviously using a deck of cards and having like near infinite possibilities is one way to kind of do it. But
so the other thing is, I guess what I would refer to as this plug and play idea, where you have a system, and I'm certainly not the first person to think of this by any stretch of the imagination. Like Fate, for example, does this, right? You have this core rule set, then you kind of plug these varying modules into that, you know, the core rules, and then you can just change it up every time you play, is an idea that like very much appeals to me, that I'm working on. And I'm sort of doing that with Paranormal Inc. Although the world is ghosts and ghost hunting, that's standard. We have like Midnight Feast, which is like happy, kind of maybe family friendly, adorable animal ghosts. There are no like animal harm scenes.
Yeah. Well, you would argue that the animals are technically already dead.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a weird one.
It is a weird one. I realized it when I was talking to someone else. I was like, no, animals are harmed. I was like, well, they're dead. But like, you don't see the harm. Which maybe speaks to my own personal kind of lines and veils, perhaps, more than anything else.
You know, that which is dead can never die. So, you know.
So the idea being you could do like a Scooby-Doo style thing, for example, or you could go like full like House on Haunted Hill, creepy horror thing, all within the same system. And so this lets you do a variety of things as a singular group, but it also appeals to a wider variety of groups, right? People who don't necessarily want to play like a Scooby-Doo funny, family-friendly game because they like gore and horror and violence and scary can still have that option, which frankly just seems like good marketing to me more than anything else.
So I guess to go back a little bit then to like the design of like Paranormal Inc. then, is that as you're kind of writing these kind of plug-in, like I guess like encounters, I guess like locations or like
mysteries,
yeah, that's probably the best thing. Or paranormal investigations. So yeah,
that's better. Yeah, that's more better.
Do you kind of have like almost like, I guess, almost like a film age rating in mind per like?
We do use a film age, like a film system in the game. It's one of my suggested things for setting the tone. And so each mystery that's being written by myself or someone else will have like a sort of suggested film rating in it. And it's one of the more like softer safety tools that I suggest in the game for figuring out
I guess
where you want to go.
There is always that sometimes balance because I think that's something that I know that I personally struggle with as a designer is that I struggle not to make jokes. Even in sometimes, you know, the most there's like, you know, a little like off to one corner there's probably going to be like a goblin in a funny hat or just what have you.
I'm not a horror person. I've enjoyed playing some horror games like Bluebeard's Bride, amazing. So good. But I don't watch scary movies. I don't design scary games. And so I have sort of offloaded those kinds of mysteries to people who actually do that kind of thing, which is the other great thing about a plug and play system is that if I can't do it, and I think that recognizing our strengths and weaknesses as designers is important, I can pay someone else to do it for me. I'm a big fan of that.
I guess that is kind of like the development arc of like anyone who starts like tabletop RPG like work and stuff like that. Is first step is like you jump into head first, you're doing everything, you're wearing all the hats, and as you kind of get through the process, you're like, oh yeah, I can get someone to edit for me, or I don't have to do like. And
you should get someone to edit for you. I resisted an editor for so long. Don't do it. The first person you should pay is probably an editor.
No, it's. I think that it's kind of like an ongoing like catchphrase to this podcast, which is like just hire an editor. Like you always need one, and you know they're always worth their weight in gold.
It's not even about like catching like the big things or even the little things. Just having that extra set of eyes will like. I hired Ashton Duncan to do the editing on Paranormal Inc. and she is amazing. And she actually totally blew my mind as she like started to rearrange pieces, and she was like, "This is like actually more clear, you know, for a player who's going through it." And I was like, "Oh, okay, like that was perfect." It was like really simple fix.
No, 100%. Like when you get the chance to kind of work with like editors, they go by many different like brands, like but a dev, you know what they develop. I'm
like a developmental editor.
That's the one I was going for. I hit a brain block. It's just I don't know. It's something weird about the joy of working with multiple different editors is kind of seeing the way their minds work, and especially when you like just realizing how there is like a flow or like a rhythm to like that. I just write my voice. Like the way you hear me talk is the way I write, and that's why it gets needlessly wordy and like goes on tangents.
I feel bad for the editors I hire because I am not one of those writers who tries to fix my bad habits either. So like there's so much passive voice all throughout my writing as I'm writing. I'm like, I'm not even going to try because I'm going to pay you to fix it.
I think that's another thing as well. Yeah, you do.
At least for me, as I'm writing, I have to be like in the flow of writing, and I can't be worried about going through and fixing my mistakes. That takes me out of it. So, and I also write exactly how I talk.
Yeah, I think it's just natural. And that's why depending on like the writing is I can't help but like I don't know. I sometimes get when I'm writing about NPCs because I have like a image in my mind. Sometimes I like if I know that I don't like the NPC that I'm writing, I will get snarky in the description.
Yeah.
Of like, you know, they wear a hat, which is clearly out of fashion. So
yeah, I'm the same way.
So then I guess to kind of to pivot or to talk more about like some particular design choices you've kind of made then, what is one design choice that you've made that you're like particularly quite proud of?
Oh, okay. I had to think about this. It was hard. It's hard to like be proud of your own work, at least for me. But two things, and these are not groundbreaking things by any stretch of the imagination. I do not claim to be the first person to do them. but it is one of them is the card system in Paranormal Inc. I just think it works. I think it works perfectly for what my design goal was, which was to make it easy to run this in a GM-less fashion. And so I'm really proud of that. And the second one would be my character design in Camp Flying was for Girls of All Kinds, where I eschewed the standard Powered by the Apocalypse playbooks. Brindlewood Bay actually does this too. And it's all just one character sheet. There are not different playbooks, which some people have said is because I wanted to get out of doing extra work, but it's actually just because I wanted to have, in Camp Flying was for Girls of All Kinds, the point is to empower young girls, like sort of the empowerment of young femme people is important. And I thought, I don't want to present these archetypes that you then have to fall into. I want to put it in open slate so that you can literally be whatever character you want to be, because that fits better with the design goal of empowering girls who are also changing. So would you say then a good chunk of like some of the decisions you've kind of been proud of is literally just, I guess, like seeing the way other people handle like their design decisions and just kind of taking inspiration and kind of breaking it down to like, this captures the essence and the theme of what I'm going for? Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm not someone who has ever designed fully from the ground up a whole new original system. I'm not particularly interested in reinventing the wheel. I would rather be like, I like that, and I like that, and I like that, and just like smush them together.
It's not reinventing the wheel. It's creating a new shiny wheel that you know. Yeah.
I've just polished it up a little bit. And yeah, I think that particularly now, maybe less so when I first started and I was just sort of getting my feet wet, but particularly now, I really think about what my design goals are for a particular thing that I'm working on, so that every decision I make, I have to take a moment to reflect on how it fits into that design goal, which then can help you make a decision about whether or not it's actually relevant or fits in your game or whatever. So yeah, like coming back to the themes and the design goals are always important, I think, in terms of.
And then I guess on any given project, do you always have like one core design goal, or is it the case of like, depending on the project, you may have multiple design goals that you're trying to like, I guess, almost like weigh up and balance, like, okay, well, this is good for this design goal, but this one it's.
Yeah, I'd say there's always like an overarching design goal. So, you know, like the title design goal, and then like some little subheadings, a couple of subheadings, but not too many. Like, you don't want to get bogged down, because then you do run into the problem of like, what happens if your design goals are actually at odds with each other, which is not really what you want. Although might be interesting as an experiment. Take a game where you have two totally polar opposite design goals and see how you can like mash them together. But yeah, so like in Camp Flying Moose, my design goal overall was to make a family-friendly game for that like teenage girls would want to play. Basically like what I would have wanted when I was busy not being allowed to play with my friends in high school.
No.
And so from there I was like, well, what are my other design goals? So that's like empowerment. It was making sure that I had good representation in the game, and so that everything that I did, I could just kind of reflect back. So even though there were like a couple of design goals, they were kind of all nested within the larger overall goal.
It's kind of interesting because like the way you kind of touched on like having a singular character sheet where every kind of player at the table is kind of free to, you know, pick and choose almost any action to kind of create who they are. It's such an interesting way that like some RPGs are kind of so ingrained in a sort of like I guess like having what was called the like defining like, oh, you know, this is X character or this is Y character, that you don't necessarily think about like what it kind of, I guess like the underlying implications of like, oh, these are how different and skilled they are. That it's one
of the ways that I actually sort of really started to now having, although Paranormal Inc. has playbooks, I'm much more interested now in more open character design, in large part because as a D&D player, I got super frustrated that 5e is like, you can be anything that you want, but then there are sort of remnants of older versions that actually put these limits on you that you can't be anything that you want. And I mean, they're starting to make those changes, right? We were seeing that, like, they're encouraging no longer having the stat penalties for some of the monstrous races. Or my biggest complaint, you can be anything that you want unless you want a multi-class, in which case you have to meet these weird random requirements, which is a garbage rule that everyone should throw in the trash. It makes no sense.
It gets janky real quick.
And yeah, so it was this idea that I was told that I could have this freedom as a player to make the character that I wanted to make, and then was like coming up against these like barriers in the system. I was like, okay, but I can't actually make the character that I want to make. And so now in my own games, I'm like, make whatever fucking character you want to make.
Just go for it. See what happens.
I just learned, someone told me, I don't remember what the game is, I'd have to go look in my tweet, but someone was telling me that there was a game they were reading where the character creation is literally write down a character concept. The end. That is the character creation. And I was like, that's so good. It's so good. I mean, it's obviously only good for like a particular kind of game, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to do that in D&D, which is a very crunchy, rules-heavy system.
I think
that these like rules-light narrative systems, it's genius.
That's why there always is a kind of the interesting interplay where it becomes like, I guess, the narrative and the mechanics. Because it is almost like a kind of you can, the more you move in one direction, the kind of more, I guess, hands-off you have to be with the other. So like, again, you can have like a super crunchy kind of like mechanical system, but then it's harder to kind of narratively justify every sort of thing of like, oh, well, that gives you 3 d6s, you know, like, I don't know, like hugging skills. And it's like, okay, well, I don't, in real life, I don't roll dice to hug in any way, shape, but so how would you say you kind of, I don't know, what is your opinion on that kind of balance of like mechanics and narrative, or where you think you most comfortably stand?
I think that ultimately, it's so tough. I was going to say, I think that ultimately, to me, sort of narrative comes, and then the mechanics need to like support the design goal of your narrative. But because it's role playing, and because other people are playing the products that I'm designing, I don't actually have any control. So on top of that, what I think the narrative might not actually end up being the narrative that's in play. Yep. So the mechanics that I think work might not actually be the mechanics that work. And so I don't know if there's really a good answer. I think you're right. Like, there's this kind of like, you know, sliding scale, and you can sort of like play with it, and you just have to do the best you can for the game you're designing.
I think you touched on like a really interesting point there, the fact that like it's different as a player as it is to be the designer. Because as a player, you can always be like, okay, well, we've got this much kind of freedom. But as a designer, you're like, okay, well, this is my interpretation, but I probably, like, this is my interpretation of the narrative. And I realize that I probably need to put in maybe just a smidgen more mechanical support than I think I do, because I have the whole image in my head.
Yes, yeah. Okay, which is, again, why you should hire an editor, because they're going to find your assumptions where you were like, well, that's just obvious, because you failed to spell it out, and it's actually not obvious.
Which I come back editors, you know? What can you do?
Well, again, what's fascinating is, here again, it comes back to this idea I have that the games I want should be adaptable. So when I'm designing, I have to worry about, do these mechanical rules make sense for, because I do like to design a lot of family-friendly games. Do these mechanical rules make sense to play with like new players, with young people? And are they also satisfying to people who know what they're doing, who are experts or whatever? And then on top of that, narratively, can this be light and can this be dark? Because, again, masochist who wants things to be all things to all people as much as possible.
Everything all the time.
Yeah. Which is really interesting because, oh, sorry, my phone is yelling at me. Like, I understand that things can't be all things to all people, and I don't think that they should be all things to all people. Each game does what it does, hopefully, very well, right? If you're looking for a particular experience, you might play D&D versus something like Monster of the Week, right? Yeah. They're kind of like, they're just different, and you know that they're different. But within that, I still want, like, when I'm designing for D&D, I was still constantly interested in finding ways to push the bounds of what it meant to play D&D. I I created an adventure called The Call of Primus, where you play as teeny tiny, it's basically lemmings, but you're tiny Modrons. And the idea is just like, you have to like navigate this, you're like the 2 inches tall, and you have to navigate this dangerous world of like large items.
But see, I think that's another interesting thing of like, especially when there is such a, I guess, especially with established systems, is the fact that so many people are used to, you know, playing that, like, take D&D. People are used to playing D&D for X number of hours. They understand the system. That those interesting subversions become all the more interesting because there is that level of familiarity that has kind of been subverted. And yeah, it's kind of that novel thing of like, oh, I'm so used to being, you know, a warlock, and now I'm a Modron, and this is you know, it's its own kind of excitement. I don't know.
Yeah. And so I guess that's always been there for me, is that I want to be like, take this idea and I'll find a way to make it accessible to people who wouldn't normally want to play this, which I guess is, you know, I sort of made this reference to not being allowed to play with my friends. Like when I was in high school, I had these like male friends who would like get D&D and they would invite me over to hang out with them, but I was never invited to play, right? And so like anyone who is not like a cisgendered white man knows that this is a hobby and an industry that's like not super welcoming all the time. And so one of the kind of foundational design goals buried deep down inside me is really just, I want to make this a game for people who aren't always welcome.
Yeah.
Which is like sort of what always, and so that means I'm constantly being like, how can I take this thing and make it different?
Yeah, or incorporate ways that kind of, again, have that I guess appealability to everyone, and to be like, well, yeah, there are the people who are like, oh, I would play it, but I you know, I only really like horror stuff, and it's like, whoa, this I have the plugin for you? So then I guess across everything that you've kind of done, then what would you say there's like been a particular lesson that you maybe wish you could have learned like sooner, other than, you know, jumping to itch, maybe, like it's not going to be as scary as you thought?
Yeah, I think that the biggest lesson would be not to be so afraid. I feel like just in general, you know, a lot of people sort of struggle with the sense of imposter syndrome, that they're not good enough. I also think that a little bit as an industry, there is a little bit of like kind of veterans who don't always make it a welcoming space for new people, and that can lead to like more people doubting themselves.
I also think a good chunk of just the, I don't know what to call it, but the way in which so the DM's Guild, the itches, the Kickstarters, they do kind of facilitate that sort of like comparisons of like, well, here's where I am, and there's always going to be like, again, oh, someone just started their Kickstarter campaign, they've got £7 million in 3 seconds. It's like, okay, wow, that's really interesting.
And so like obviously I still struggle. Like I watch my friends have these amazing successes and get hired by these amazing companies, and I am equal parts very happy for them and like a little bit jealous. I'm like,
it's only human nature.
Totally human. But I think I let some of those voices like stop me in the early days. I had the idea for Camp Flying was very early on, and I was sort of actively discouraged by some people to like pursue that right away. They were like, oh, you should do some other smaller things first, which I do think is good advice and is actually advice that I would give now. So I'm being contradictory here. But I also felt like, at least for me, that really felt like I was being told that I wasn't good enough. And then I ended up putting off a game for a long time that I probably could have written sooner.
Yeah, I suppose it's a case of like there was a lesson there, but maybe had it been given in a different sense of like just like sometimes there are sometimes, you know, ideas that you have and you're just like, I don't know if like sometimes you don't necessarily know if you're ready for that. And there's nothing worse than having like this perfect project idea in your mind. You go, I'm going to start immediately. And then it just falls to pieces, and you're like, okay, well, I guess was it a bad idea, or was I not ready to like design that yet? I do
also think that's part of the process, though, is like having that idea and then watching it to fall to pieces. I think we've all been there, and I think it's important. I think failure, although I don't think that's failure, but I think that failure is important, and not all of our ideas are actually going to be winners. And it doesn't matter how excited and perfect you think it is, you might get into it and be like, shit. And that doesn't happen, I think.
Yeah, and then what you get to do is you get to throw it into the graveyard document.
Yeah.
And then in about a year down the line, when you go grave digging, you're just like, oh, I can revive this now. I have it. There's a storm out with lightning.
Yeah. So that's why, like, I've had my advice to people is like, maybe don't make your first project this like 800-word core rule book for a brand new system.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean don't start working on it right away. Like, absolutely work on it, work away at it, and then in the meantime, you can reach like smaller projects. Yeah. To sort of like,
I think it kind of depends if like that one project is like a dream project. It, like I know again I don't know I don't think I'm the sort of designers to kind of have those. Like I don't really have like a big picture that I'm kind of striving towards. I'm just paddling aimlessly. Yeah. So I think, but that's why when you do have like the thing of like, this is the one, this is my vision, this is the one thing I want, there is that kind of case of like, well, why am I not doing it now? And yeah, it's a tough one to kind of balance. Speaking of, I segued myself. Speaking of dream projects, would you say that you have like a kind of dream project that you kind of aspire to kind of tackle one day?
Oh, I think like you, I'm a little bit of a paddler.
I've coined a term. It's great.
Like weird route. I've sort of like, I went over there and now I'm over here and I'm doing this. And will I be here for a while? Maybe something new will come along. I don't know. Because I'm much more interested in hacking or designing for rule sets that are already existent than designing my own. I almost feel like it's harder to have a dream project in that regard.
I suppose you won't really know until like a system comes out that just catches your attention.
Yeah, exactly. I've been sitting on for a long time. One of my first ideas is I wanted to design a Powered by the Apocalypse game about roller derby.
Okay. Yeah.
Which I wouldn't necessarily think is like a dream project, but it's one that's kind of still like lingered in the background, which sort of relevant to what we were talking about is a theme that excites me. I used to play roller derby. And I have some like fun ideas about how we could take some like night witches mechanics where you have like kind of day moves and night moves. Where you could have like, like game moves versus non-game moves.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say something about there's like night roller derby is like a whole other like it's like once it turns nighttime, people turn feral. It's like
so I feel like that's percolating in a sense because I'm not ready for it. Like it's not fully formed. I'm not 100% confident enough to go where that idea I think needs me to go, and so it just sits there.
But the fact that it is kind of still sitting there kind of says that there definitely something is to that idea, because there are times when you do have an idea that just like
and then it goes away.
It goes, and then you're like, well, clearly I'm not that invested in it. Yeah. The Goblin Canon story can wait. I'm not.
Yeah.
Then no, awesome. And then to kind of, I guess, to kind of start kind of rounding things off, you've kind of, again, you've really had kind of a journey that has kind of been hugely inspired by the kind of systems and communities around it that you've engaged with. Talking about the tabletop RPG community, who would you say some of the people are that kind of particularly inspire you?
Oh, I'm inspired by so many people for like a variety of reasons. I mean, Eat the Rich wouldn't exist without Kat Evans. They and I sort of like shepherded this on its very long journey, and everything they make, I think, is amazing. I had an amazing experience co-designing a Brindlewood Bay hack called Bed, Breakfast, and Beyond.
Nice.
The set. We'd never worked together before. We were both super like jazzed about this idea, and I was like, well, let's just do it together, and it was so good. And they are such a joy, and they're doing amazing things. So Chris inspires me, and I could honestly, it's like a whole list.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what I'm.
Because then I feel like I'm leaving people out.
No, my go-to response to like that is like again, it is a cruel question because again, the community is like so it's so incredibly kind of close knit. But my go-to response is like if you feel like you should have said someone, and someone's like that, like, oh, why didn't Alicia say my name? I cut you out. I did some editing. It's hard to name everyone and stuff like that. It's because that's kind of the benefit we have. There's too many good people. There's so many good
people, and different people inspire me for different reasons, right? Like some people inspire me because they're like kind of like amazing community leaders. Some people inspire me because their work is mind blowing. Not that everyone's not making good work, but like there are like these different reasons, right, that you might find someone inspiring. Jason Cordova has like basically championed my career for the past year, and I love the work he's doing. So like I find him super inspiring.
How has actually that kind of been? Because I imagine it's got to be super humbling to kind of create a system and then have someone kind of just be like, well, I'm gonna make so much content for your system.
It's really interesting. Again, talking about imposter syndrome was like, oh, am I that annoying like little sister basically who's like, oh, I want to do this too, I want to do this too, I want to do this too. But he is so kind and warm and welcoming, and he wants people to design for his systems, and so like we sort of developed this good working relationship. I feel like, I don't know, maybe he's honestly like, I don't even know her that well, but from my perspective, we've developed a good working relationship. And he's given me a lot of work. So
I mean, that's something's got to going right somewhere, No, fantastic.
I actually think so. It's something I want to do with Paranormal Inc. is like open it up for people to design mysteries, and that is also a design goal of mine. Essentially, I want to make it so that people can write their own mysteries, and it will be an SRD, and they can publish them and all that stuff. Because I think that a game like rises on the community that's around it, and like you need to have them excited and engaged, and I can't have all the good ideas. I don't have all the good ideas. One of the most humbling things is seeing work come in for Paranormal Inc. that I'm like, this is so much better than what I ever could have written, and that's exciting to me.
So you actually kind of touched on like at this point, have you kind of sometimes working with so many different systems, have you sometimes struggled with the content of some of the systems SRDs? Because like I'm curious to see, like I've never made an SRD. I wouldn't even know where to begin. I've not made a game.
Yeah, so I have never designed my own SRD either. I'm going to do it for Paranormal Inc. for the first time. I don't really read the SRD. I do in the sense that I'm like, what can I legally do and not do with this system?
Sometimes I guess it's more looking out for like the things like, okay, I legally cannot do this. This is what I will not do.
Exactly. Beyond that, I mean, I might reference them for like a quick rules thing, or if I'm really struggling to explain something, I'll like go to the SRD and be like, perfect, there's the rules like pre-explained to me. Not that I'm like ripping off work left, right, and center, but like,
no.
The work is done there for you. So if you can't figure out how to do it, you can just copy and paste that section. But I think because I also tend to mix and match things. I designed a trophy incursion where I followed the SRD like really closely because it was the first incursion I had ever designed. So it was helpful in that regard, actually. Because I also don't always have the opportunity to play the systems that I want to design for before I start designing.
Yeah.
Or possibly ever, to be honest. Like, I've never played a trophy game, and I have a published trophy incursion, and that's just because the opportunity hasn't arisen for me to play. Yeah. And so, while I do think that playing the game can make you a better designer, it's not necessary, and that's SRD is going to save your butt.
No, because you I think you can, again, reading it and stuff, you can definitely kind of capture the essence and kind of, again, if it's enough to kind of, kind of inspire ideas, and no, well, fantastic. I mean, geez, looking at the time, we've done it. We've managed to.
Hour.
It flies by. 1 minute you just you say hello, welcome to the podcast. The next thing, bam, we're done. Yeah. But again, thank you so much for taking your time to come down and have the chat. It's been delightful. I've learned.
Nice.
Yeah. But before leaving, I guess the kind of important questions is one, what are you working on at the moment? And two, where can people kind of hear about it?
So I'm finishing Paranormal Inc. That's the big thing. Gotta get that Kickstarter delivered. Despite my best efforts, there were delays. I think that's just a given. You think you've got it, and then you don't. You don't got it. Yeah. So yeah, Paranormal Inc. is my big thing. I just did a reprint of Camp Flying Moose, which you can buy. So you can find me on Twitter at Alicia Furness, where I post about these things, or on my website, aliciafurness.com. Nice. Very difficult.
It's nice when you can get your named domain.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I'm on Twitter a lot. So like if you want to come and like listen to my very random ramblings, you can find me there mostly.
Nice. Yeah. And well, thank you so much, Alicia. And yeah, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. Do I have anything coming out recently? Not that I know about. If I do, it's commissioned work. You never know how it is. So check the description. There might be some stuff to click. If not, there isn't. But that leads me to my very final question then, which is how do you end a podcast?
I don't know. I don't podcast. My gut instinct would just be to like hit the button and run. You know.
Yeah, let's do it. I'll just hit it now.